You're having a good time on the couch with your friends. You're having a good time in the bed alone. You're having a good time watching TV. Let us ruin your day. Yay!
Welcome to Now It's Ruined, the podcast for people who hate enjoying things. I'm Kate Bridle.
And I'm Larkin Harrington.
And today we're ruining our first person. I know we talked about two people on the last two episodes, our Mother's Day special, but we were not ruining those people. We were just ruining Mother's Day via those people, in a way. Leonardo ruins herself.
She does, yeah. I didn't do anything.
But we didn't ruin Sojourner Truth. We weren't like,
no,
here's a deep, dark secret about her. We were celebrating her just as a Mother's Day special, but the story was sad. Anyway, today we are actually ruining our first person, and Larkin doesn't even know who it is yet, so I'm really excited.
Huzzah.
But first, as ever, housekeeping. If you're not already a member of our Patreon, please go join, even if it's as a free member, because you still get lots of bonus content. And again, just as a reminder, once we hit 666 Patreon followers of any level, we will do an 80s photo shoot and let you see all the behind the scenes craziness, and then also let you choose which one should be our new cover art. So we're excited for that. And also just please keep spreading the word about us to get other people to listen. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, as we always say. If you just send a link to your favorite episode or clip or whatever it is to like one person, if each of you just sends it to one person, we'll double. And we're already really happy with where our numbers are, but we're hustling. Some of you are obviously already getting the word out because we have been spreading around even more. We have listeners in Germany now.
Which is what? What?
Yeah. Germany just came in the other day, and I was like, oh, this is perfect, just in time for me to talk about Nazi Germany. Sorry, Germany.
Get ready.
I'm sure you're like, God, every time. But sorry, the Nazis ruined a lot of stuff.
Yeah, you saw our title, and we're like, well, it's going to get brought up.
Mm-hmm. Yep, you knew. You knew what you were getting into. And South Africa has kept growing. Thank you, South Africa. And here in the U.S., there are a few states that are kicking total ass. I'm trying to start like a little war between the states just to get people to tell other people to just trying to start some friendly competition. So Washington State, absolutely dominant so far, not surprising. We both know people there. It's where Larkin is living. But New York, California, and Illinois are all neck and neck behind them. New York and California in particular, they keep kind of going back and forth for who's leading, like within one of each other. So
ooh. East Coast versus West.
Okay, last piece of housekeeping. I'm excited. Larkin doesn't know about this yet. So last week I had mentioned Colin Hanks, finally, which again was shocking because I bring him up all the time. And I joked that we should make a Colin Hanks jar that I have to put money into every time I bring him up. So I did. I made a Colin Hanks jar.
Oh my God.
And if you're listening to this just in audio format, you can check us out on video on Patreon and YouTube and take a gander at the jar that I have made. Obviously, my printer was like out of color ink because his face is all like green and weird. But whatever, you still.
I love the photo you chose. It's sassy. It's a little bit like he's judging you for.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, another one, Kate, huh?
But I fished out a bunch of quarters that I have from various, purses, etc. And I have a bowl of quarters next to me. I figured quarters is good because that's going to maximize what goes in there. So I owe 3 because I brought him up on the Sojourner Truth episode, and then I brought him up again on the Leonardo episode, and now I'm bringing him up here. So I'm going to put in 3 quarters into the Colin Hanks jar.
3 plunks.
And I referenced him earlier to you in a text, so I'm going to make it an even dollar, actually, just right off the bat, because I made the Drunk History Charles Dickens reference earlier.
Oh, that's true.
So even though it wasn't on the podcast, I just want to round it out to $1. There we go. We already have $1 in the Colin Hanks jar, and when it fills up, we will see how much we've got and donate it to a charity that we think that Colin would approve of, which I think could be any number of things, because he seems like a very cool and generous person, so part of why we love him. Yeah, he just seems like a very, conscientious human being, which I appreciate. If I ever go on a long rant, I should just have to drop a quarter in the jar every 10 seconds that it lasts. Just
right, as you're talking, you just hear a little plink, plink,
plink. And then the other thing I like about him is clink. Yep. Okay, that's it. Let's get to the ruining.
Huzzah.
So as I said, we are ruining a person today, and I actually pivoted from what I was originally going to talk about, from even what I mentioned on our last episode, but we are still talking about the Nazis, so I did fulfill that promise that I made on the last episode.
Wondering.
Larkin doesn't know who this is, so I went back and forth between giving her clues to see if she'd guess who it is and just telling her who it is and seeing what the first thing she thinks of is when I say his name. But Larkin agreed to take on the challenge of being given clues. So I will give you a clue and then I'll get like kind of more specific with them as they go. And if you don't get it after I get more specific, I will take pity on you and just tell you who it is because I know you have heard of him, but I know if I'm put on the spot, I can't always think of anything.
I know I'm going to forget every single man ever, except for Colin Hanks, because we just talked about him.
Except for Colin. Oh, counting it for you too.
Okay,
I'll just
that's
use
fair.
my quarters. I have plenty of quarters. Okay, here's a question that I have for you. Do you want the time period right off the bat so you have that context, or do you want it as a clue?
You know, I might need it, so let's...
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So that's fine. It's the 1920s to 30s were like his heyday.
Okay. I'm already feeling nervous that I'm not going to pull this out.
That's okay. It's okay if you don't. No one judge Larkin if she doesn't guess who it is. First clue. He was famous for accomplishments in aviation.
Okay.
Would you like to make a guess now, or should I give you another
one more?
one? Name a famous pilot now. No, okay.
Now, go.
Okay, next clue. He was at the center of what was referred to as the crime of the century.
Wait, what? I do know this, don't I?
You definitely do. But I
You
have
definitely
I have
do.
two more. I have two more clues
Okay,
to give
okay,
you if
okay.
you don't.
I'm not going to get it. I'm already sweaty.
It's okay. No, it's okay. Okay. The aforementioned crime of the century was the kidnapping of his son.
Oh, fuck. Yeah. See, now
You
I've
know
forgotten
who it
every
is, but you
single
just don't.
name that's ever been said to me that is a male name. I don't know it.
Let me see if this one does it for you. It might bring it out of the back of your lizard brain.
Okay.
His plane was called the Spirit of St. Louis.
Fuck. God damn it. I knew this was going to happen. Why did I agree to this?
It's okay. It's okay. I'll give it to you. The person we are going to be ruining today is none other than flying ace Charles Lindbergh.
Okay, fuck me. Yeah. Mhm. I wouldn't have gotten...
Lindbergh, baby.
Yep. I wouldn't have gotten the Charles part. I was like, I know it's an L.
It's okay. No one's judging. No one's judging. Maybe some people are, but those people suck. Okay. Obviously, you've heard of Charles Lindbergh. You know
Yeah.
of his name. And I think we all have. We've all probably heard of Charles Lindbergh. Even if you weren't taught about him in history class, he was like literally the most famous person on the planet for a while, certainly in the United States after his record-breaking flight from New York to Paris in 1927. They called him Lucky Lindy. He was incredibly popular, hugely pervasive in American culture. He's referenced in the musical Chicago. He's had dances and soaps named after him. He was all over posters and ads and everything back in his day. Like, his popularity really cannot be overstated. And even if you don't know about all of that, you've probably heard of the Lindbergh baby kidnapping, which, as I said before, was referred to as the crime of the century, which is when his oldest child went missing from their house.
That's really, sadly, the only reference I have in my mind of his name. The other stuff,
okay.
I'm like, sure, yes. I remember all of
Yeah.
that about him.
Somewhere in my house, I have a like old school like leather pilot little hat that I wore for Halloween one year, but I couldn't find it. It's just as well because it goes over my ears, so I couldn't have really worn it while we record anyway. But I was really like, damn it. I also should have gotten some aviation gin, but I think aviation gin is gross. Sorry, Ryan Reynolds.
It's not my choice either, the aviation. Sorry.
I wanted to like it. I did.
I did
but
too. I truly did. Ryan, if you're listening, we tried.
We tried, but also you and Blake Lively had a plantation wedding. Okay.
Womp womp.
Ruined. Charles Lindbergh's mass appeal and popularity meant that the American people were a little taken aback when he gladly accepted the Service Cross of the German Eagle in Berlin in 1938 from Hermann Goering on behalf of Adolf Hitler.
Little appalling there, Charles.
Yes, and this is actually it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Excellent news.
But yeah, that's right. American hero Charles Lindbergh was kind of a fan of Nazi Germany for a hot minute. And as you'll see, his stance on the issue wasn't necessarily completely straightforward. The Third Reich hadn't started forming new concentration camps in earnest yet when he accepted the Service Cross. Americans didn't find out about the concentration camps and the atrocities happening in them until later in the war. And when Charles Lindbergh did find out about those atrocities, apparently he was horrified. But he also knew about some of the messed up stuff that the Nazis were already doing when he was rubbing elbows with them repeatedly. So.
And it's like what you have said repeatedly so far on the show, which is like, no, other people were around going, really? This is the choice? Mm.
Yeah, and as we'll see, even people close to him were like, Chuck.
Chuck.
Come on now. But that's not all. In addition to the Nazi stuff, he was also a fan of eugenics, which I'll explain a little bit later, and as a bonus, cheated on his wife and had a whole heap of secret German families. So there's all of that.
Oh boy. Okay.
So you and I actually each have some stuff in common with old Chuck Lindbergh. So you and he share a birthday. He was born February 4th, 1902 in Detroit, Michigan.
No.
Yeah, afraid so. Aquarius, buddy.
I want to share your birthday, Chuck.
And then he grew up in Little Falls, Minnesota, which is about an hour from where I grew up in Minnesota.
Oh, weird.
His father was a lawyer, but Charles was raised on a farm, which is where he used to lie on his back, gazing at the sky and fantasizing about being able to fly. Apparently, he was not very good in school. He didn't get great grades. As you'll see, he was a pretty smart guy, especially with mechanical and scientific stuff, but school just wasn't his thing, and he was pretty sure he wasn't going to graduate. But he kind of got saved by World War I because so many farmers were off serving in the military that they desperately needed help on farms, so much so that his principal at his high school said that he would offer full academic credit to any students who helped on farms. And Charles Lindbergh was like, this is the only way I'm going to graduate. Me, I can do that.
Me, I
Fiscal
can do
labor,
that.
Let's
I
go.
can do it.
So he got his credit and he did graduate high school, and he wound up getting into the University of Wisconsin, where he studied mechanical engineering for 3 semesters before dropping out. He dropped out because he was just interested in flying, and I think he was just somebody who was more of a doer than a sit in the classroom kind of person. He just wanted the excitement. As you'll see, he's definitely a thrill seeker. He's an adrenaline junkie. Like, he just wanted to be out and in planes. So in 1922, he enrolled in flying school at the Nebraska Aircraft Corporation in Lincoln, Nebraska. And this was the first time that Charles Lindbergh fulfilled his boyhood dream of flying. It was in a biplane, and it was flown by an instructor, and it was everything that Charles had dreamed of. He was like, I am in the right spot. I am doing the right thing with my life. Love it.
This could be such a romantic story. Like, so far, it feels like it is.
It is, to a point. Like, when I was writing, I was like, like Charles. And then you get later and you're like, oh, this is a Charles.
Oh, boy.
Unfortunately, in order to do a solo flight, you had to put down a $500 deposit to cover anything that might happen to the plane if you crashed it as a dumb newbie. So Charles didn't have the money to do a solo flight while he was there. So he wound up working there for a while to try and save up the money for a solo flight. And he became a barnstormer. Barnstormers were stunt aviators. So they were like trick pilots and performers on airplanes. And Charles was a wing walker and a parachutist. So another guy was flying the plane, and Charles was out doing shit on the wings and jumping out and getting saved by parachutes and doing tricks and shit. Pretty cool.
These are all like amazing names too. Barnstormer, Wing Walker. Are we in an anime?
The Owls of Ga'Hoole.
Yeah, that's exactly where we're.
So eventually, Charles kind of got sick of saving up for this solo flight situation and asked his daddy to buy him a plane.
Oh.
And his daddy said yes, but daddy didn't buy Charles a shiny new plane. He was not the guy who gets his kid a Corvette. He was like, you can start on an old beater car and then we'll see how you do.
I mean, props.
In 1923, he buys Charles a Curtiss JN plane that was a World War I surplus plane that had been used for training in World War I, which Charles referred to affectionately as Jenny, because it's JN.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Charles goes to pick Jenny up in Georgia, and everybody there at the airfield assumed that he was an experienced, like, solo pilot. And he was like, they just gave me the freaking keys to the plane and let me take it, man. Like, I didn't need a license. In those days, you didn't need one. They were just like, here you go, kid. That's when he does his first solo flight. Not in any kind of training environment or with any manner of supervision. Just a 21-year-old kid grabbing a plane in Georgia and being like, see ya.
Oh, wow. Okay. Sounds safe and reasonable.
Right. But he was fine. He was fine. He knew how to fly. I think he'd done a lot of non-solo flying, I think. So he'd trained. He knew how to fly a plane, but he just never done one on his own. And he flies the plane back up to Minnesota, and he does barnstormer stuff along the way. He stops and to make more money. And then he uses the plane to help his dad run for Senate. And I love this story. His dad's running for Senate, and Charles is like, Dad, great idea. Grab a big stack of handbills, like promoting your campaign, and we'll go up in the plane, and you can throw the handbills out of the plane, and they'll like rain down on the people of Minnesota. You know, it'll be great.
Oh my God.
Charles intended for his father to throw these out like a few at a time, like one at a time.
Oh no.
But instead, his dad chucked the whole pile all at once, and the pile hit the stabilizer of the plane really heavily, and they wound up crashing. Lindbergh always insisted on calling it a crack up and not a crash. He was like, it wasn't a crash, it was a crack up.
A crack
but
up?
But they crashed. He was trying to downplay it, I think.
Sure. Daddy, no.
I just love that image. Charles is like, go ahead, Dad. And his dad's just like, boof, the whole thing.
Sure. Here we go.
Like, just disaster. And his dad also did not get elected. Didn't work. So Charles loves Jenny and all, the plane, but in a trend that will continue with human women in his life, she wasn't enough for him. So he goes down to Texas to join the Army flying school because he's heard that they have really powerful planes that you get to fly there. Like, he gets to up his game.
The big toys.
Yeah, and that's what he wants because, again, he's a thrill seeker. Unlike his other school experiences, Charles actually really excelled at this flying school. He learned precision flying techniques. He had the second highest GPA in his class. He took subjects like military law, meteorology, and, of course, aerodynamics. And despite the difficulty of the courses and the fact that he got into a mid-air collision that forced him to jump and be saved by a parachute during training, which I would be like, okay, well, this isn't for me, bye.
Yeah, goodbye, done.
Farewell. But despite all of that, in 1925, he was one of only 19 cadets to graduate in what started as a class of 104. So
Okay, Chuck.
after he graduated, he started doing an airmail route in St. Louis. And airmail routes were really dangerous because you're flying through all sorts of crazy weather. Things are unpredictable. And he had to jump out of his plane multiple times. He's actually the first man to be saved by a parachute twice. And then he had to do it more times also. Still not deterred. Still was like, this is what I love to do. Gonna keep flying.
Made a certain way.
Yup. Not the way I am made. It's the way Nate is made, I think.
Yeah. I was just thinking of him. I was like, yeah. He would be fine.
My husband is actually also an aviator. So. St. Louis was a hotspot for aviation innovation, so he was in the right spot. And back in 1919, so before all of this businessman named Raymond Ortigue announced a $25,000 prize for any aviator from an allied country that could make it from New York to Paris or vice versa in one flight. So this had been on the line for like 6 years by the time Charles graduated from flight school. The first transatlantic flight had already happened. These British aviators, John Alcock and Arthur Brown, had hopped from Newfoundland to Ireland in 1919, but the route from New York to Paris was nearly twice as long, and there weren't planes that could physically do it until the 20s. It was meant to motivate people to, like, innovate. This is another example of Charles not being deterred by something that would make me go, nope. September 21, 1926, this French flying ace attempted the route starting in New York, but he tragically got no further than the end of the runway in New York before he crashed, and he killed 2 of his 4 crew members.
Oh, Jesus.
So, yeah, this horrible crash happens, attempting this crossing, kills 2 people. Charles reads about this and is like, well, I'll do it.
Jesus Christ.
Built different. But he actually figured like one big long flight was probably safer overall than all of these little airmail flights that he's doing where he's constantly bailing out of his plane. He's like, I've almost died a bazillion times. So how bad can one big flight be?
Sure, yeah. He's like, I'm used to near death and I just have to sit and fly a straight line for a while.
He goes around and he talks to some local businessmen and aviation supporters, and they pooled their resources to get a brand new plane custom built for Charles Lindbergh. He knew he wanted to do the flight solo because he figured that would be a better chance to not overload the plane, make it lighter, it can go further. He meticulously helped design the plane himself, and in 1927, the now famous Spirit of St. Louis was complete and ready for flight. So he flies the plane from California to St. Louis, and he breaks a speed record for a flight of that distance on the way there. Then he flies it from St. Louis to New York, breaks another speed record. Finally, he took off from New York to Paris, and on May 21st, 1927, so 98 years to the day that this episode is being released, he landed in Paris, met by a crowd of 150,000 people, having completed not only the longest nonstop flight in history, but the first solo transatlantic flight.
Dude.
Yeah. He did it. He fucking did it. And then he went to an ambassador's house in Paris where he passed the fuck out because he had been awake for 63 hours.
No, you can get really messed up
Yeah.
from that.
And it sounds like he was, like, when he tried to land, it was like there were all the lights from the reporters and stuff, and he was a little like, I don't even know where the airstrip is. I don't know how he didn't die.
There really aren't that many people like that.
No. There 63 hours. I was thinking about that, and I was like, I've been up for maybe close to 48 before, and I was loopy as hell.
And not having to concentrate. So, like, sure,
Right.
there are periods where you can kind of relax, but you're not going to rest.
No, and it's not a 63-hour flight. So I don't know if he was up. Like, it's like 22 hours or something, I think, that the actual flight took. So I don't know if he was nervous or he was just preparing or what it was, but he was up for a long-ass time, and he crashed. Good. Well, crashed as in went to sleep, not crashed the plane.
Not the
obviously.
plane. Crashed in the counselor's house? Who?
Ambassador's. The
Ambassador.
ambassador's house. This catapulted Lindbergh to instant worldwide fame. And of course, since he was American, he got a hero's welcome when he got back stateside. He took a ship home. He didn't fly. He got on a Navy ship.
I was going to ask.
There were 250,000 people in D.C. waiting for him when he arrived. President Calvin Coolidge presented him with a Distinguished Flying Cross and a promotion to colonel in the reserves. And Charles Lindbergh was everywhere. All of a sudden, he does this big goodwill tour throughout the U.S. It's a huge success. At least 200 songs are written about him. He's used to promote all kinds of products. He's also the perfect poster boy because he's young, he's handsome, he's got like a cleft chin and pouty lips, and he's 6'3", like ding, 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 right?
Cartoon pilot.
Yes, he is. He is. I feel like every cartoon pilot actually is probably basically based on Charles Lindbergh.
Oh, the like American hero, which, I mean, even still now we do it, but I feel like back then it was very much like we had our American heroes, like our idols.
He's our guy.
Guy.
I was trying to think of like a comparable person these days. Obviously we like celebrate film stars, but it's not really the same thing. And I was like, the closest I could kind of think of for people who become that pervasive are like athletes. So like,
that's where I was going with it, like selling the shit out of Nike shoes and
right, like Patrick Mahomes on everything, or like Michael Phelps when he was.
I was just going to say Michael Phelps for sure.
Yeah, I think that's the best comparison. Like, because he also just was accomplishing crazy, like superhuman stuff.
Yeah, like you're not a real person.
Yeah, and it's the Olympics, so it's like you are representing America. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He took a win for America too. So. Yeah,
right, because the prize was up for any like pilots from any allied country, so it was kind of a race. It was like, is France going to do it? Is England going to do it? You know, and America got him.
Got him, and everybody shit their pants and ate an apple pie.
Yeah, America, fuck yeah. So that's what happened. So Charles is fucking everywhere. He's the guy in the United States and worldwide, really, but especially in the States. He even got marriage proposals, unsurprisingly, I guess.
Of course he did.
Yeah.
Ted Bundy did.
Ted Bundy. Oh, Lord.
You deflated like the most disappointed helium balloon.
That was such a good ruin. That was so great. You just captured the essence of the podcast right there. Yeah, he got a lot of proposals. This American hero. Yeah, so did Ted Bundy. Womp womp. Perfect. Good job. Nailed it.
I need the Debbie Downer sound.
It would never stop, though, because that's all we do on this podcast.
That's true. It's true.
So Lindbergh did not accept any of these marriage proposals from women that he presumably did not know. So he was still one of the country's most eligible bachelors when he met Anne Morrow later that year. Anne's dad was the ambassador to Mexico, and Charles was on a Latin American goodwill tour now. So he's done the States, and now he's in Latin America. Okay. And Anne's dad hosted him during Christmas at their abode in Mexico City. And Anne was completely starstruck, unsurprisingly. They sat next to each other at Christmas dinner, and she like doesn't even talk to him because she just doesn't know what to say. She's totally tongue-tied, and that actually worked in her favor, because when you're the hottest thing on the planet and everybody wants a piece of you, people are constantly all up in your business, and Charles actually appreciated the silence. And yeah, he was like, this chick isn't asking me anything or like trying to get in with me or anything. She's just sitting here next to me eating Christmas dinner
quietly.
How charming.
And how I like my women, quiet.
She's shutting the fuck up, just how I like it. He actually said that it was the first time that he was comfortable around a girl, which is kind of cute. Yeah.
Again, more of the romance.
I know, and it just keeps going here because this is the part that I was like, I would have fallen in love with Charles Lindbergh. Because the next day, he takes her and some other people flying. And of course, she's thrilled to be flying, for one thing. Right. But also pretty thrilled by watching him fly. Because she's like, he was super relaxed, but like very in control. And she was like, he flew with one hand on the wheel.
Oh.
And she also said, quote, he had the most tremendous hands.
Oh.
And I'm a hands gal.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I get it.
I love a good set of hands. Yeah.
Love a good set of hands.
I do. Big turn on.
And for her to point it out, like, she was strucketh by
the hands. Yep. Mm-hmm. The Morrows, when they're not ambassadoring in Mexico City, live in New Jersey. So that's where Anne is most of the time. And Charles starts hanging around the Morrow residence quite a bit. But he didn't actually ask Anne out until the fall of the following year, in 1928. And of course, for their first date, he took her flying. And by November, they were engaged. And they got married in a small, quiet ceremony in the Morrows' backyard in May of 1929. Again, just...
Yeah, it's a nice story.
Romantic. And then Charles is like, do you want to learn how to fly? And Anne's like, yeah, I do. So he starts teaching Anne how to fly planes. She does her first solo flight in August of 1929. So they're married in May, and she's flying solo by August. Like, she picked it up. She took to it.
Good for you, Anne.
Mm-hmm. She gets her pilot's license. And in fact, Anne Morrow Lindbergh was the first woman and only the 10th American to get a first-class glider pilot license in addition to a private pilot's license. So she's also a history maker.
Hell yeah.
At this point, Charles becomes the chairman of the Transcontinental Air Transport Committee, and he works on innovations in aviation with folks like Henry Ford, who, by the way, was a giant anti-Semite and will come up more in this story.
Excellent.
He's also probably going to get his own episode one of these days, but for now, he's in this one. Charles and Anne start flying together all over the world. They're having amazing adventures, documenting all of it, and they even continue these adventures after they have their first baby, Charles Jr., which leads us, unfortunately, out of the romantic times and to the crime of the century and the tragedy that became the catalyst for Charles's experience in Europe with the Nazis, the disappearance and murder of Charles Jr., aka the Lindbergh baby. I don't have time to go into everything about the case. There are tons of resources out there to learn about it, but I'll give an overview because it does affect why the Lindberghs wound up in Europe in the first place.
And I need a little recap for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's morbid,
is.
but it's interesting. Trigger warning, this does contain some discussion of violence against children. We have to issue that warning a lot lately.
Yeah. Whoops.
On March 1st, 1932, Charles Jr. was kidnapped from the Lindbergh home in New Jersey. Charles and Anne were both home at the time, and they were alerted to the fact that baby Charles was missing about 10 p.m. by the nurse, Betty Gow, who went to check on him and found that he wasn't in the nursery. Obviously, massive freak out. Charles and Anne and Betty are all searching everywhere that they can. Charles Jr. was just 20 months old, or for people like me who fucking hate it when people talk about babies' ages in months when they're over a year, he was a year and a half-ish.
Thank you. Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a year and 8 months. Just say it. I'm not a doctor.
And do you think I can do math like that on the fly when we're just having a conversation? Like, no.
I'm 607 months. Shut up. Okay. So I don't even know how old that would be. Can anyone?
I don't want
I want to do math.
That's also
really,
the thing. It's like, who cares about, like, just tell me he's over a year.
And I know that it's like for milestones and stuff, but like,
Sure, but
I'm
that's
not
for you.
Yeah, I don't care. You'd be 50 and a half if you were 607 months old, FYI.
Okay. I'll log that away for when I'm 50 and a half.
Anyway, Anne, Betty, and Charles search the premises and find a ransom note on the windowsill of the nursery demanding $50,000. And they call the local cops, who call the New Jersey State Police, who come and search the property. There were no fingerprints or blood to be found, but there were footprints below the window, which they said couldn't be measured, and I don't know why. And then there were 2 sections of a ladder that had been like cobbled together to reach the window, and it was partially broken, like it had broken when someone went up or down it.
Oh, weird.
So this became a big part of the mystery. It's like, what is this ladder? Who had access to this wood? Like, who would have made it? On March 5th, so 5 days later, Charles gets another ransom note in the mail from Brooklyn, upping the demand to $70,000. And then 2 more notes come in the following days, going back and forth about whether they'll like accept an intermediary to deal with them on the family's behalf and how to communicate and all of this stuff. And this guy, Dr. Condon, agrees to act as an intermediary and also offers to pay an additional amount of ransom to get Charles back. So he's just trying to help get this baby back alive. Dr. Condon now starts receiving the notes because he's the guy, the go-between. He receives a 5th note, which sends him on a scavenger hunt for a 6th note, which he finds near a subway station. And this note said they would send proof of identity. So then a 7th note comes with a pair of baby's pajamas, which are identified as Charles Jr.'s.
Oh, God.
13 total notes were sent about Charles Jr.'s kidnapping, and the last one was actually handed to Dr. Condon by a mystery man supposedly named John that he was told to meet up with and give money to. And in this last note, the kidnappers claimed that Charles Jr. could be found on a boat in Martha's Vineyard. But when they went to look for him, he wasn't there. And this is because Charles, sadly, was already dead. His body was discovered accidentally 2 months later, less than 5 miles from the Lindbergh home. He'd been killed by a blow to the head and was severely decomposed, so most likely he was killed very shortly after he was taken and just dumped near the highway in New Jersey.
God, I must have just blocked all that out.
Yeah.
Ugh.
I remember when I was first thinking about it, I watched a documentary about it a few years ago, and I was like, I didn't remember that he had been found, like,
Yeah.
and that he had actually died. Yeah, really sad.
Ugh, that's miserable.
So the case when Charles was missing was already huge, but
Of
now
course.
that he's dead, it gets even bigger because it's still a mystery. We still don't know who did it, and obviously it's the son of Charles Lindbergh, like big deal.
Yeah.
So the FBI gets involved. J. Edgar Hoover himself is like supervising the case at the command of President Roosevelt. It's the highest profile crime imaginable, thus why it is referred to as the crime of the century. Leads are pouring in from everywhere. Eventually they catch a guy by tracing some of the bills that were handed over in the ransom. And this guy who's using these bills matches the description of John, quote unquote, that Dr. Condon gave. And eventually they have enough evidence to arrest him. His name is Bruno Hauptmann. He's a German immigrant. And they find a bunch of evidence that it was him, apparently, in his apartment. The merits of the case against Hauptmann are disputed to this day. It was the 30s, so obviously police work was,
Yeah, a heaping amount of. Bleh.
There was also a lot of criticism for how involved Charles Lindbergh was in the investigation. Like, he was really allowed to have his say about everything. But I'm not here to discuss the merits of the case against Hauptmann, whether or not he was innocent or guilty. He was found guilty and he was put to death for the crime. Some people actually think that Charles Lindbergh himself was involved. I don't really subscribe to that. Like, for all his faults, I don't see him as a baby murderer, but who knows? Doesn't strike me as his thing, but...
Sure.
Interesting tidbit, though, about this case. It is what made kidnapping a federal crime. The federal kidnapping statute is actually called the Lindbergh Law, and it was enacted to help facilitate speedier recovery of kidnapped victims who were being transported across state lines, because Charles Jr. was abducted in New Jersey and then allegedly taken to New York, and there were issues with local authorities and cooperation across state lines and all of that stuff.
God, that drives me insane.
Larkin and I talk about this a lot in the context of the documentary we watched about the Night Stalker, because the detectives in there literally say, like, well, I was LA and they were Ventura or whatever it is, and so we didn't I don't know if it was Ventura. Please don't like come at me and actually me
Actually,
about
Kate?
that. It was just the neighboring county that I could think of. They were like, we wanted the catch, we wanted the glory, so we didn't communicate. They blatantly say that, the detectives in the Night Stalker case. You're like, come on, people are dying.
Literally deaths on and you're just sitting on evidence and not sharing.
Mm-hmm.
And Kate and I are like, imagine if that was run by women.
Oh yeah, we'd be like on the phone like, oh, hey, hope I'm not bothering you. How are the kids? Did you get the soap basket I sent you? By the way, I found this knife. You had any murders, like knife murders lately? It might be nothing. I'm so sorry to bother you if like you don't have anything.
No, that actually lines up with a murder I just had. And I was about to call you and check to see if the basket you got of all the assorted fruits, like it.
Yeah. Was there a weird footprint at yours?
Yes. Oh my God. That was unmeasurable for some reason. The guys came back and
The boys showed up and were like, we don't want to measure this.
we don't want to measure it. Yeah.
We're too busy measuring our dicks.
Oh, against each other's.
Anyway, that's our rant. Back to Charles and Anne. They are obviously devastated by this tragedy. And of course, they're like completely overwhelmed by the amount of press that is surrounding it. They're being hounded all the time. And Charles is getting increasingly unsettled by all of this attention on his family. And so in December of 1935, he and Anne decide to move to Europe to get more privacy for their family. So this is how the Lindberghs end up in Europe. And they lived in England and France for 4 years. They only go back to the States once in that time to visit. They were like, no, thank you. Too much. And they spend their time in Europe studying and writing. He was also very scientifically minded in general and interested in a lot of things. And in fact, before they even went to Europe, he had been working to develop a pump that would keep organs alive outside the body to help enable surgery.
Wow.
Yeah, and his buddy on this project was a guy named Dr. Alexis Carrel, or Carrel, I don't know. Sorry, I'm going to say Carrel. A French scientist who won the Nobel Prize in 1912. Charles started working with Dr. Carrel in the 20s, and their pump actually worked. Like, it was legitimately, It's called a Lindbergh Carrel or a Carrel Lindbergh pump, whatever, something like that.
Oh, that rings a weird bell. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, maybe you even encountered it in like vet tech stuff. So pretty cool, right?
Yeah, really cool. And also still tracking with they're healthily, they've moved on. They're not wallowing probably very much so wallowing in the death of their child.
Yeah,
but
wallowing in private.
Yeah, in private and not in the public. Like they could have, yeah. All right.
Yeah, they didn't like capitalize on the tragedy for their own fame or anything like that. However, okay, the pump is pretty cool, but you know what's not so cool? Carol was a big fan of eugenics and Charles wound up being one too.
Great.
And for those of you who don't know, eugenics is a pseudoscience that was very popular at this time. Like, Charles was hardly the only famous person at this time who was advocating for it. It's all about keeping the white gene pool clean and maintaining the superiority of the white race through selective breeding and medical intervention, etc. And it is a massive pile of unscientific bullshit. But at this time, people were touting it as real science. And Charles and Carol were way into it.
Awesome.
And they only wanted their pump to be used for white people because, you know, they are the ones that we have to prioritize.
Chuck.
It gets worse. Okay, so Carol said stuff like, quote, "There is no escaping the fact that men are not created equal, as democracy, invented in the 18th century, when there was no science to refute it, would have us believe." So he's like, democracy makes us think that everyone's equal, but that's not science. We now have the science to show that that's not true.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. And then he went on to say, "We don't yet understand the genesis of great men. Perhaps it would be effective to kill off the worst and keep the best, as we do in the breeding of dogs." And Charles concurred with all of this.
Of course, yeah. Okay, that's out. There it is.
Yep. Now, to the end of his days, Lindbergh vehemently denied being anti-Semitic or racist, and I'm sure he believed that he wasn't. But he sure did and said racist and anti-Semitic stuff a whole lot, so I'm not sure how true it is, how much I buy it.
Right.
I think he thought that, like, you had to hate other races to be racist.
Sure.
Which I think is a pretty common misconception of racism back then and even still today. Is it's like, well, I'm not racist. I don't hate black people. I just think that white people are better and black people shouldn't get all the same stuff. And you're like, do you hear those statements back to back?
I'm going to recommend you get a tape recorder.
Like, that's the thing, is like a lot of his other stuff was tape recorded. You can hear it in his voice and you can also read it in his words. So it's not like all of this stuff is like, it's a rumor that I said that. No, he said it to a lot of people and wrote it in very public places. I'll get to that in a second. But I think he was just like the paternalistic racist, right? Who is like, you know, we're just being real about racial differences or whatever. But no, he was very, very racist and quite demonstrably also anti-Semitic, even though Anne also denied that he was. Like, she was like, I never heard him say anything, you know, in private he wasn't, you know, ranting against Jewish people or anything. But you're like, okay, but in public he said some shit. For example, in an article he wrote for Reader's Digest, very broadly circulated publication to this day, in 1939, Lindbergh stated, quote, "We, the heirs of the European culture, are on the verge of a disastrous war, a war within our own family of nations, a war which will reduce the strength and destroy the treasures of the white race." And then in the same article, he went on to write, "We can have peace and security only so long as we band together to preserve that most priceless possession, our inheritance of European blood, only so long as we guard ourselves against attack by foreign armies and dilution by foreign races." But don't worry, Larkin, he's not racist.
Not racist at all. I didn't hear
not a hint.
No. White treasures? Is that something?
The treasures of the white race.
The treasures of the white race. No, and that's all normal and fine.
Yeah, if you're using words like European blood and dilution.
That's the big one. That was a big one for me.
It's not a good one. As far as anti-Semitism, we're going to get on to more of that very shortly. Don't worry. But one example comes from a journal entry that he wrote on April 10th, 1939. 1939 was his big year for just really saying a lot of bullshit. Apparently, this entry was conveniently left out of the published version of his journal that came out about 25 years later, but it was available to researchers studying his papers, and they have been like, this is what Charles Lindbergh said. Lindbergh wrote in this journal entry, quote, "A few Jews add strength and character to a country, but too many create chaos, and we are getting too many." Yikes, Chuck.
Yikes. You wrote that.
You wrote that in your journal.
So Chuck's midlife crisis is just being wildly racist and anti-Semitic. He's like, my kid died, my life sucked for a while, and I'm just going to go embrace who I truly am, which is just a gross, racist anti-Semite.
Pretty much.
And write about it to the masses. Okay.
Yeah, and 1939, like, I'll get on to a little more to, like, what we knew, kind of what the Nazis were doing at which point. But, like, post-Kristallnacht, all right? Like, the war has begun in 1939. It is not cute. we're going to go back in time a little bit now to Charles and Anne in Europe, 1936. They've been living there about 4 years, and Charles was invited by the American embassy in Berlin to come to Germany and check out what the Germans had going on in their air program. The American attaché is like, hey, Chuck, will you go take a peek at what the Germans are doing in there? Because I think they'll let you in, and we would like to know what they've got
Inquiring
going.
minds.
World War II, as I just said, hadn't started yet at this point, but Hitler had been in power for 3 years. He's gearing up for to start some bullshit, and people are noticing. They're like, that German military force sure does seem to be expanding. What's going on there?
Huh.
Maybe we should keep our eye on that. This guy seems intense.
He seems intense. Yeah.
Just because the war hadn't started yet did not mean that the world didn't know that the Nazis were already pulling some major bullshit. Like Dachau, the concentration camp, which became the model for all subsequent German-run concentration camps, was established in 1933, though initially relatively few Jewish people were imprisoned there. At first, it was mostly communists, social democrats, trade unionists, and other political enemies of the Nazis. Feeling a little close to home these days.
My stomach is trembling.
Prosecuting people who are enemies of the person in power? Initially, it was those folks. Then after a little while, they start imprisoning more massive groups of people like the Roma, gay people. Everybody starts going to Dachau. And then post-Kristallnacht, they put, I think it was 11,000 Jews in there en masse. Like, just that's when it really started becoming a focus on putting Jewish people in concentration camps. But it's already established, like they're already locking up their political enemies at this point, and people know it.
Right. There's no getting around that that's happening already. Yeah.
No, there are headlines everywhere talking about this. Like it's not like he wouldn't have known. And so by the time that Lindbergh went to Berlin in 1936, it was also very widely known that Jewish people in Germany were being subjected to violence and discrimination. The Nuremberg race laws had been put into effect the year before in 1935. These laws established that Jews in Germany were not, in fact, full citizens and therefore had no political rights and banned intermarriage between Jewish and non-Jewish people. So they're like laying the groundwork with these laws for the final solution, right? Because if you have no rights, nobody can stop people when we start putting you in cattle cars and sending you to death camps.
Of course.
Because you're not citizens. So again, a little close to home. We can put you on planes and send you to Libya or Venezuela or wherever it is. That is the Germany that Charles Lindbergh visits in 1936. And man, he just found it so charming. What a place. So Hermann Goering, Hitler's right-hand man and founder of the Gestapo, was at the time the German air minister. And like everybody else, he thought Charles Lindbergh was the fucking man. He was like, Lindbergh's coming. Fangirl. Hermann Goering, major fangirl for Charles Lindbergh. Like,
I'll show you all the planes.
He literally was. He was just like, I will give you a tour of everything. Like, he gave him a tour of the facilities. He was like, look at all the stuff we're building. Do you have any notes? Lindbergh was really impressed. And he and Anne also went to the Olympics as Goering's guests. And they're just rubbing elbows all over the place with Hermann Goering. They visited Germany 2 more times over the next couple of years. Charles each time was touring factories and airfields and getting an idea of the might of the German air power. And he's becoming more and more impressed every single time and more convinced that the Germans are going to be the most powerful military force in the world and no one's going to be able to stand up to them, which you would think would make him be like, uh-oh. But instead he's like, wow. So by 1938, he and Anne are like, we're going to move to Berlin. This place is lovely. And bear in mind that over these 2 years between 36 and 38, things aren't getting more chill in Germany. The situation isn't improving for the Jewish people in Germany at all. So he's seeing things escalating and is still like, that's where I want to go.
That's where my little heart has got to go.
Which brings us back around to where we started October 18th, 1938, when Goering presented Charles with the Service Cross of the German Eagle for his contributions to the world of aviation. And to be clear, this isn't like an award for service to like the German government or anything like that.
Right.
It's just an award that they're giving to like visiting innovators and dignitaries and stuff. So our old anti-Semitic friend Henry Ford got it the same year. And also the year before, the recipient was Thomas Watson, the chairman of IBM. So ruined. Yep. But the American people were not pleased with their hero, Charles Lindbergh, accepting a Nazi medal with a full-on swastika on it, and he was instantly vilified in the American press.
Well,
Everybody was like,
that. I was at least, because the only way to receive that is to say thank you, hold it, spit on it, and throw it on the ground.
Well, and that's exactly what people were upset about, was he accepted it very casually. And some people are like, he was naive, and he was just like, it's another medal on old Chuck Lindbergh's wall. Like, he was like, yeah, I'm getting medals and awards all the time from everybody. Like, I cycle them through. Other people were like, he is tacitly accepting everything that the Nazis are doing, which is how I would take it, given his experience in Germany. And like, he's not an idiot. Charles Lindbergh, for all his faults, is not a dumbass. And it really didn't look good for him when Kristallnacht, the Nazi-coordinated night of terror and violence against Jews across all of Germany, happened less than a month after he accepted this award. Not that I'm saying that Charles knew that, like, Kristallnacht was coming. I don't think that. But, like...
No, like you said earlier, it was evident that things were getting worse, not better, and that they were only going to escalate. And he, as you have said, is not an idiot and has 2 eyeballs and presumably a brain that he can look around and say, this isn't going well for those people that I'm definitely not prejudiced towards.
After Kristallnacht, Charles and Anne were like, maybe we shouldn't move to Berlin.
Oh.
That's where your line is. A highly orchestrated, government-orchestrated, systematic attack across an entire country against an entire group of people is what it takes for you to be like, oh, whoopsie, maybe not.
Maybe not my dream place? I don't know.
Right.
Fuck.
So they actually head back to the U.S. instead in April of 1939, figuring it would be safer. I don't even think that he was, like, turned off by what Germany was doing. He was just convinced that no one was going to win a war against them and was like, we better go. So when he got back to the U.S., Lindbergh dedicated himself to the stance of isolationism. Isolationists believe that we should keep out of other countries' businesses and just worry about ourselves. After Germany invaded Poland in 1939, the French and the British broke down and were like, Poland, we got you. We're coming to help. You can count on us. And this officially kicked off World War II. President Roosevelt, FDR, was very concerned about the Nazis steamrolling across Europe and thought America should step in. But a majority of Americans at the time, over 80%, were pro-isolationism as of the start of the war. So they were with Lindbergh at this point. Most Americans were like, I don't think we should go over there and do anything about that.
Right.
See how England and France do. And then Lindbergh criticized President Roosevelt very openly for wanting to stop the Nazis. And this was when he published that Reader's Digest article about how we need to protect our pure white gene pool and all of that other stuff that, according to him, was, again, not super racist.
Not at all. Right. Let's remember, Chuck's not racist.
Let's remember, as he says more and more racist and anti-Semitic shit, that he's not racist or an anti-Semite. Guys, let's
keep reminding ourselves.
Again, he was absolutely convinced that there was just no way to beat the power of the Nazis. And he thought that getting involved in World War II would cost a lot of money and lives in a losing battle that wasn't anywhere near our American soil. So he was like, why would we do that? And he and most Americans at the start of the war were like, let's just sit back and stay out of it. But as time went on, Germany started pushing into France, and then they started bombing England, and the American sentiment started to shift toward getting involved in the war. But Charles stuck to his guns, or anti-guns, I guess. And in 1941, he joined the America First Committee. Again, ringing any bells? America First was a staunchly isolationist group that was like, we are not getting into World War II. And it was headed by Robert E. Wood, the head of Sears.
No.
So we got Sears, IBM, Ford. Ruined. Boom, boom, boom. You're welcome, all these bonus ruins.
You're welcome, guys. I knew about Ford, but jeepers.
Yeah.
Sears.
I think a lot of people know about Ford. Yeah, Sears and IBM. And IBM's little, like, AI assistant is called Watson, after Thomas Watson.
Hello?
Did you do your research on your guy? He had a medal with a swastika on it. Okay.
So,
okay, this is a fact that I could not back up apart from a reference in Wikipedia and one mention in an article in The Guardian. So I'm saying this with a big grain of salt to avoid a Henry Cavill tisking. Not that I really want to avoid it, but...
Right, of course.
Tisk me daddy. But per Wikipedia and The Guardian, Ford was actually so anti-Semitic that he got kicked off the board of America First because he was so bad for their reputation, which is saying something.
Whoa.
If that's true, holy shit, dude.
You've got to be...
Bad.
A real problem.
America First wasn't like a pro-Nazi group, at least not on the surface. Like, that wasn't their messaging. They weren't like, the Nazis are great, which is why we shouldn't do anything. They were just deeply opposed to American involvement in the war for various reasons. But there were, of course, a lot of anti-Semitic overtones coming from a lot of their members.
Undertones, overtones, whistles.
Yeah. And The committee was not small. They had 850,000 members across the U.S. from all backgrounds, all professions. But as the war went on, as I said, people became less and less enthused about their viewpoint because more and more news about all the fucked up shit that the Nazis were doing was reaching America. So Charles Lindbergh is invited to join the Executive Committee of America First, and they offer him a salary, and he's like, please, I couldn't possibly. I'll do it for free.
This is a hobby and a dream.
I just love not stopping the Nazis. And he was also like, I'm going to give so many speeches for you guys. You're going to love it, but you have to let me write them all and I will not be submitting them for approval.
Okay.
Like you said, midlife crisis, like he seems like a stubborn old man just entrenched in his ways, but he's like 39 at this point. He's basically my age. Like,
ugh, pathetic. Chuck, what happened to you? It sounded like you had a nice life.
your baby was tragically murdered, but that doesn't
that
really
did
like
happen to you. We just talked about it. What happened to you, Chuck?
We're not laughing at baby murder. We're laughing at Larkin's forgetting immediately of the very serious discussion we just had.
Because I'm so mad at him and disgusted. Okay, fine. Your baby was stolen and brutally harmed. That should even embolden you to want to protect more people from not losing their
allegedly
children
by
and
a
their
German
families.
man.
Exactly.
Okay, so he's like, I'm giving all these speeches and I'm not submitting them for approval. And one of these speeches marked the final nail in the coffin of his heroic reputation. In a speech entitled, Who Are War Agitators?, which he delivered in Des Moines, Iowa on September 11th, 1941, Charles Lindbergh said it was time to name names and blamed three groups of people for pushing America toward the war. The first was the Roosevelt administration, with whom he was fully at odds at this point. FDR hated his fucking guts.
Naturally.
The second group were the British, and group number three, and here's the part that really gets him in trouble, the Jews.
I knew it was going to be bad, but what?
What's kind of funny to me is I think that Charles Lindbergh thought he had written a really well-balanced speech that would avoid accusations of anti-Semitism. He was baffled that he was accused of anti-Semitism after this, because he says, I don't blame the Jewish people for hating the Nazis in light of all the persecution they've faced. He said, quote, no person with a sense of the dignity of mankind can condone the persecution of the Jewish race in Germany. But then he also said that Jews should be the first to oppose the war because, quote, they will be among the first to feel its consequences, which feels a little...
Shove that right back in your hole and choke on it. What?
Oh, it gets better. He also decided to throw in that the greatest danger the Jewish people posed to America was, quote, in their large ownership and influence in our motion pictures, our press, our radio, and our government. So he tosses out the old Jews run the media shtick. I'm
leaving.
That part of the speech about the danger that they pose is a non sequitur. It's shoehorned into this section of the speech where it doesn't make any sense. So I feel like he just really wanted to say it. He was like, well, I got to get this in there somewhere. It really comes out of nowhere. It's so weird. And then immediately after this, literally the next line, he's like, I'm not attacking the Jewish people. I admire them, actually. And you're like, again, Charles, here's what you do. Get yourself a tape recorder. You hear yourself.
Play it back to yourself. I'm getting weird Elon Musk parallels. Innovative. Just once he was given his platform, his little weird freaky self came out and was like, I'm gonna wear a cheese hat and fucking rev a chainsaw and yell about anti-Semitism. Do a salute, perhaps, if I'm feeling spicy. I don't know.
Maybe twice in a row if I'm really feeling spicy.
If I'm really feeling it that day.
Yeah, we just traded in our Tesla for a big old pickup truck. Bye.
Was it a Ford?
It's not. No,
I know it's not.
So yeah, I agree with you. It is. It's very Elon Musk vibes. I didn't even think about that. It's not like he didn't have any warning that the speech was fucked up before he gave it, because Anne read the draft and fully called him out on it. She was like, babe, you cannot read this. Everybody is going to say you're anti-Semitic because, you're saying shit that's super anti-Semitic. So maybe don't do this. Apparently, she literally said to him, I would prefer to see this country at war than shaken by violent anti-Semitism. And he refused to take it out or change anything. He was like, nope. And after this came out, yes, he got absolutely torn to shreds. He was widely accused of being an anti-Semite. The backlash was really intense, so intense that he resigned from the America First Committee that November. And his mother-in-law, Anne's family, his mother-in-law and his sister-in-law were both like, we don't condone this. They distanced themselves from this whole situation. They were like, nope, we do not agree with anything that he said. And his reputation never really recovered. So then the attack on Pearl Harbor happens, December 1941. And now there is just no question about America getting involved in the war. We're going. And once it was clear that there was no going back, Lindbergh all of a sudden was like, well, I want to serve. Put me in, coach. He's like, he had resigned his military commission in 1939, but he, was like, hey, come on, like, give me a command. I want to fly for the good old US of A. But FDR was like, how about go fuck yourself?
How about eat my ass?
His exact words actually were, you can't have an officer leading men who thinks we're licked before we start, which I would agree with.
Ooh.
So the Secretary of War, Henry L. Stimson, denied Lindbergh a command. But Lindbergh managed to insert himself into the war effort anyway via the man who just will not stop poking his anti-Semitic head back into this story, good old Henry Ford. He's back. He hired Lindbergh as a technical advisor at a plant in Michigan that was converting from making cars to making bombers. And in 1942, Lindbergh joined United Aircraft and eventually convinced them to make him a technical representative in the South Pacific to study how combat affected the aircraft performance. So despite the fact that he was a civilian, he goes to the South Pacific and he flew in combat and rescue missions. He's even credited with at least one kill, which honestly feels shady as fuck to me, given that he was a civilian. But it's war, I guess.
I guess.
And we could give him credit for changing his tune and like serving as a great American patriot or whatever and being like, I was wrong. But honestly, after everything I've read about him, I feel like part of him was just bored and was looking for a way to get back to a thrilling lifestyle and get back into the air and maybe into America's good graces. And I do think he genuinely wanted to help innovate and like help other aviators, but I just don't buy that he's suddenly like, FDR, you were right, let's be a team.
He was missing the glory. He wanted it back.
There are just two more aspects of Lindbergh's life that I want to cover. And first, I'm going to ease up on him for a second and talk about a slightly redeeming quality. I'm not saying that this makes up for absolutely anything. It doesn't. It doesn't fix him. But
nothing will.
Just to take a little tiny break from the onslaught of negativity. From 1960 to his death in 1974, Charles Lindbergh was very involved in environmental efforts. There's actually a picture of him literally hugging a tree, and he's like an old man. And if you forget about all the eugenics and Nazi stuff, it's really cute.
Put it aside. Wasn't Hitler a vegetarian?
Uh-huh. Yeah, and he loved dogs. Yeah. Great. Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
So, yeah, the picture when I saw it, I was like, oh, and then I was like, ugh. Oh. Too ruined.
The tree's feeling the same way, I'm sure.
Yeah. He's like, don't touch me.
Get off me.
Unless it was a really racist tree, maybe. Like those jerk trees in the Wizard of Oz. I'm not saying those trees are racist, but
there's an energy there. Yeah.
There's an energy. Yeah. There's some MAGA energy among those trees.
Yeah.
Anyway, he traveled all over the place. He met with world leaders and environmentalists. He focused on species of plants and animals that were at risk of going extinct. He worked to protect the homelands of tribal groups in the Philippines and Africa. He was fascinated by the Maasai in Africa. He visited them several times over the years, which again, I was like, do they know what you were saying about Black people?
Yeah, did they? They did not, I'm sure.
In the States, he established a national park in northern Minnesota. He got involved on the board of the World Wildlife Fund, and he worked to protect wolves and whales. He wrote a significantly less offensive article in Reader's Digest than the one he published in 1939 and said, if I had to choose, I would rather have birds than airplanes. Okay. He also worked to protect land in Hawaii, which is where he eventually moved to live out the last days of his life. And he died there on August 26, 1974, and is buried in a grave overlooking Kipahula Bay.
Oh, well, good for fucking him.
Anyway, we can't end on a positive note like that. So let me place one last tile in the ruinous mosaic of Charles Lindbergh's life.
Oh, wonderfully said.
In 1957, when Charles was 55, he met and fell in love with a 31-year-old hat maker in Germany named Brigitte Hesheimer. This affair lasted until he died, with Charles visiting her several times a year, and he kept this a complete secret, even from the 3 children that they had together. He would visit them and call himself by a different name, and they had no idea that their father was Charles Lindbergh until much later.
Okay.
But that's not all. At the same time that he was seeing Brigitte, Charles was also seeing 2 other women. One of them was his German translator and private secretary, Valeska, with whom he had 2 children. And the other was Brigitte's fucking sister, Marietta, and he had 2 kids with her too. So these 5 kids he had with the 2 sisters are half-siblings and also first cousins.
I don't feel bad for any of those things I said about you, Chuck.
Kept it a complete secret, was like very under wraps. And before he died, like I think at the time he knew he was dying, it was like 11 days before he died. He wrote letters to all three of them and was like, keep everything secret, like covering his ass. I'm like, you're dying.
You're dying, you fucker.
And I don't even want to give him the credit of like, it's to protect Anne and my other kids. Like, fuck you, dude.
No, it wasn't. And poor Anne.
Yeah, 3 secret families. But the women did. They all kept it a secret until eventually Brigitte's kids kind of got wise. And one of her kids, Astrid, like confronted her and was like, dude, you have to tell us like what is going on. And when they learned the truth, they published a whole ass book about it in Germany called The Double Life of Charles Lindbergh.
Good for them.
Charles and Anne's youngest child, Reeve, connected with her German siblings and wrote of Charles, I have the feeling that he was the only person involved with all these families who knew the full truth, and I keep thinking that by the time he died in 1974, my father had made his life so complicated that he had to keep each part separate from the other parts. I don't know why he lived this way, and I don't think I will ever know. But what it means to me is that every intimate human connection my father had during his later years was fractured by secrecy. And there you have it, from golden boy to shady-ass old man, the Charles Lindbergh story.
Wow. And what a journey it is. I didn't think I could get angrier halfway through, and then I just kept getting angrier, and I want to spit.
Spit if you have to spit. Yeah, it's funny because actually in the script, I initially had this bit at the beginning where I was like, his legacy's complicated, and I'm still not sure how I feel about him. Like when I first started the research, because I was like, maybe he was just misguided. And then I kept doing my research and writing, and I just ripped that whole thing out. I was like, nah, fuck this, dude.
No. Man, what a fuck bag. And it's like you said, like there were so many instances of just like complete ignorance. Like maybe in the beginning when he was saying those things that you were like, well, I mean, he didn't quite understand maybe what it meant to be a racist or anti-Semite. But then like being around the right people and being encouraged and saying, oh, hey, yeah, that really tracks with some worldviews I have. And then just not being a good person about it. Like,
and he never admitted any, like he just never admitted fault for anything. Never apologized, never walked anything back. Even being called out by your wife. Like your wife is like, dude, you could have done so much good.
Especially
instead.
In the time you were alive. Like that was a time where you could have used that.
How much could you have done if you had just gotten on board earlier with like, maybe we don't like the Nazis?
Well, you've ruined that guy. It was an emotional journey. I thought I was with him. Turns out I was not.
No.
And you'd led me.
Yeah,
you'd led me along.
Romantic.
So romantic. Beautiful.
Gorgeous hands.
Good, big, gorgeous hands. Why'd they gotta be racist like that?
Was so horny for a second, and then you ruined it.
Ruined it. Dried up.
Low tide.
Low tide.
Gorgeous hands. High tide. Nazi, you say? Low tide.
Nazi. Ooh.
All right. Well, that's it for this episode. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Patreon. Subscribe on all the things so you never miss anything. Please rate and review us. And if you have a suggestion for something we can ruin, please reach out and let us know. You can message us on social media or email us at nowitsruined@gmail.com. We will be back at you next time. Actually, I think, if I am thinking about this right, our next episode will be a very special Pride episode, and it will be our first ever guest episode. We have Erica Vogel, who is a trans activist and author, and she is going to come on and ruin allyship for us.
So excited. She's amazing.
Yeah, we're very excited. Love y'all.